Hello, this video is for IXL activity 8.C.1. It is titled Integer Addition and Subtraction Rules. The 3-character code for this activity is Yankee Delta Alpha. All right, so rules concerning the addition and subtraction of integers. So first, integers. Let's talk about that. Integers are non-decimal numbers, and they can be positive or negative. So numbers like negative 27 or positive 43 or negative 192 or positive 569 or negative 102,693 and also a positive 1,912,649. All of these would be integers. Notice that they are non-decimal numbers, and they can be positive or they can be negative. And yes, if you're wondering, 0 can also be an integer. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our first question here. It says, is 13 plus 2 positive or negative? Well, 13 and 2, they're both integers. They're both positive numbers, right? So in this case, we have a positive plus a positive number. So we're adding a positive and positive together. And, well, if I had $13 and someone gave me $2 more, I would still have money, so that would be like a positive number, right? It would be positive 15. So positive plus positive equals positive. Adding two positives together just creates a result that's even more positive than the two add-ins. Add-ins are whenever you add two numbers together, the numbers that are being added together are called add-ins. So it results in a positive number that's actually greater than the two add-ins. Next one, negative 19 plus negative 15. So in this case, I have a negative, and I'm adding to it a negative. So I have negative plus a negative. Well, let's think about that. If you owe something, a negative number is kind of like owing money, right? So if you owed $19 and then someone handed you a bill for $15, you would owe even more money. So this lets us know that whenever you have a negative and you add it to a negative, you're going to get something that's even more negative. So negative plus a negative equals a negative. So with this page here, we see positive plus positive equals a positive, and a negative plus a negative equals a negative. So if the signs are both positive, it's going to create a positive result, and if the signs are both negative, it's going to create a negative result. Now that's for addition. Note that in this here title, integer addition and subtraction rules, there is the word subtraction too, so you can expect we're going to find some subtraction in here at some point. So let's look at the next page. On this page here, you'll notice that all 4 of these examples are addition, just like on our previous 2 examples. However, something's different. You'll notice that each of the add-ins, in this case, one's negative, the other one's positive. That's true for all 4 of these examples. So we're going to use the concept of absolute value, and if you've learned about absolute value before, you know that absolute value is all about the distance from 0. So we're going to consider negative 10 and a positive 10. And it's 10 units from negative 10 to 0, and it's also 10 units from positive 10 back to 0. 10 positive units, right? Distance has to be positive. You can't have negative distance. So for absolute value, we use these 2 bars to represent absolute value. And so we say any given value, we'll call it x. If it's positive, it's going to produce that same value, only positive. But if it's negative, such as maybe negative 10, if the value of x is negative 10, it's going to produce that same value only in positive form. So we're going to use the concept of absolute value in this situation, and we're going to consider the absolute value of each of the add-ins in order to let us know if the answer to the addition of 2 integers is either positive or if it's negative. So let's go ahead and first consider the problem here. Negative 8, we want the absolute value of negative 8, and we also want the absolute value of positive 4. Now the absolute value of negative 8 is positive 8, and the absolute value of 4 is positive 4. Well, 8 is greater than 4, and we got that value from taking the absolute value of a negative number. So in that case, our answer would be negative. And if you think about this, let's go ahead and go with a number line. This negative 8 plus positive 4 is going to be pretty easy for us to consider. If in the event that we're at negative 8, we're going to add positive 4 units, that's going to take us just far enough to get to negative 4, not quite back to 0, so you see that our answer would indeed be a negative result. So on the next one, let's consider the absolute value of negative 37. That's going to be positive 37. And the absolute value of positive 44. That's going to equal positive 44. So 44 is greater than 37. We got this from taking the absolute value of a positive number, so our answer is going to be positive. On the next one, we have 15 and negative 9. So let's look at the absolute value of 15 is 15. And the absolute value of negative 9 is positive 9. 15 is greater than 9. We got that by taking the absolute value of a positive number. Therefore, our answer would be positive. This one here, let's take a little bit of a shortcut. Our first add-in is positive. The next one's negative. So let's go ahead and think of what is the absolute value of negative 33,878. Well, it would be a positive, right? 33,878, right? So this absolute value would be greater than the absolute value of 900 or 697, and we got that from a negative number. So in that case, our answer would be negative. Moving along to the concept of subtraction of integers, and particularly whenever we have integers that are different signs, like one's positive, one's negative. Well, ideally, whenever we talk about subtraction, I always like to tell my students that subtraction doesn't exist, just the addition of negative numbers. As a matter of fact, I had one student who was a 6th grade student of mine my first year teaching, and I taught him this, that subtraction doesn't exist. It's just the addition of negative numbers. You might be thinking, well, why did they teach me in grade school about subtraction? Well, if subtraction is actually the addition of negative numbers, whenever you were 5 years old, teaching you the concept of negative numbers was probably going to be rather difficult. It was a lot easier to talk to you about taking away or subtracting. However, whenever you get into the properties of addition and properties of addition, like the identity property of addition or the inverse property of addition, or you have the identity property of multiplication or the identity property of multiplication, those are properties that belong to either addition or multiplication, but we have no identity property of subtraction, or we have no identity property of division. It just so happens to be that subtraction is an inverse operation to addition, and division is the inverse operation to multiplication. So whenever I say that there's no such thing as subtraction, just the addition of negative numbers, you'll kind of see what I mean in just a moment. By the way, that same student, that 6th grade student of mine, went on to her freshman high school class a few years later, and the teacher said something about subtraction, to which she said there's no such thing as subtraction, only the addition of negative numbers, to which her teacher asked her, where did you hear that? She told her, from my 6th grade teacher, in which her teacher responded, well, if you see your teacher again, tell him I said thank you. And she did see me again, and she did tell me that. So let's look at what this means. Whenever we talk about subtraction and actually being the addition of a negative number, here's how we get there. If we change the sign and then use the opposite of the number that follows the sign that we changed. So let's take that into consideration. Let's take negative 55. We're going to keep the first number the same. We're going to change the sign from subtraction to addition. Then we're going to take the opposite of the number that follows that sign. So the opposite of 3 is negative 3. So we end up with a negative plus a negative, so it's going to get even more negative. Pretty cool, huh? If you don't believe that actually works, think of it this way. If I have 5 minus 3, well, we know that equals 2. But if I have 5, change the sign to addition, take the opposite of the number that follows, which is negative 3. 5 plus a negative 3 is still positive 2. You get the same answer. So now you might see why I say that there's no such thing as subtraction, only the addition of negative numbers. 64. Change the sign, right? Take the subtraction, turn it to addition. Take the opposite of the number that follows. Positive 87 becomes negative 87. Now we have two different values, or one positive, one negative, that should say. We have absolute value 64 is 64. The absolute value negative 87 is positive 87. 87 is greater than 64. We got that value from taking the absolute value of a negative number. Therefore, our result would be negative. Looking at a few more examples. Here we have a negative number minus a positive number. So I would start doing right-overs here, but I'll do that in the next one, right? You don't have to necessarily write all this out. You'll get to where you can kind of just look at it and figure it out without writing it out. So I'll go ahead and rewrite this. negative 53,136. And I'm going to change the sign to addition. I'm going to take the opposite of the number that follows. So this is positive, so it becomes negative. 5,296,649. So I now have negative plus negative. So it's just going to get even more negative. On the next one here, I have a positive minus a negative. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and change it to addition. Take the opposite of this. So instead of it being negative, it's going to be positive, right? So I end up with a positive number plus a positive number. So it's just going to get even more positive. Last example, negative 496. Let's change the subtraction to addition. And let's take the opposite of this here. So this negative number becomes a positive number. So I do have a negative. I have a negative. I'm adding it to a positive number. So we're going to have to use absolute value, right? So the absolute value of this number here is going to be 496. The absolute value of this here is going to be 451,642. This one's greater. This value is greater than this value. And we originally got that from a positive, well, I should point down here. Got it from a positive number, so in this case, the answer is going to be positive. All right. So those are all of my examples for IXL 8.C.1, integer addition and subtraction rules. Good luck with your activity.